morning, members of the media who are here, ladies and gentlemen who are joining us online or by whatever means. The People's National Party is in this fight against violent crime, along with all well-thinking Jamaicans. We want a safer Jamaica, and we don't oppose for opposing's sake. On the other hand, we cannot support strategies which do not work and which violate the rights of the Jamaican people. On Sunday, the Prime Minister announced another round of states of emergency, SOEs. And this was in Western Jamaica and in parts of the corporate area. Question is, why is the government going backwards? Clearly, their toolbox is empty. I must remind Jamaica that states of emergency were used for 3 years, from 2017 to 2020. They failed. Gangsters migrated to other areas of the country, and murders continued. The data make this quite clear. The average annual number of murders in Jamaica over those 3 years was significantly higher than the average annual number of murders achieved over the previous 4 years under the People's National Party administration. This was clearly a failed strategy, and I'm sure MP Peter Bunting, our spokesperson for national security, will go into that in a bit more detail. Over those 3 years, 2017 to 2020, the states of emergency have involved many thousands of young Jamaicans being detained without charge, some of them for many months. Their rights were trampled on by being locked up for extended periods without justification. Some of them lost their jobs. Many of them suffered lasting setbacks in their lives. The vast majority of these detained persons were eventually released with no compensation. This is not the Jamaica that our ancestors fought and gave their lives for. Support for the states of emergency fell over that period as people tired of the pointless checkpoints and the curtailment of freedom of movement and freedom to conduct business. In the early days of the SOEs, they enjoyed support from 81% of the population. But by February 2020, that support had fallen to 49%, and 44% said that the SOEs were not effective. The government then abandoned that failed strategy shortly thereafter. The 3 years of the SOEs also encouraged sloppy law enforcement. The power to detain without charge became a power to ignore the discipline of thorough investigation of cases and preparing cases to secure convictions in court. The recovery of firearms and ammunition during the states of emergency was disappointingly low, and very few prosecutions for serious offenses have arisen from the SOEs. The rank and file of the security forces grew frustrated with the adverse working conditions involved in manning checkpoints under the elements for long hours, and they resent that there were no improvements in their compensation to recognize the sacrifice they were making. We sympathize with their plight. They are upset about being asked to do this again. There was discriminatory treatment between small business operators, the pan chicken man and other street vendors, and the large formalized business establishments. Yet again, the two Jamaicas showing themselves. Furthermore, no long-term improvements were achieved by 3 years under states of emergency. Violent crime continues to plague our nation, and this was expected, as the states of emergency are a drastic short-term emergency response. They are not a strategy to reduce crime, and there have been no accompanying measures to achieve a sustained turnaround in Jamaica's long-standing crime problem. For over a year since discontinuing the state of emergency during 2020, the government has not come up with anything to tackle the crime problem. They are bankrupt on ideas. They have passed no new legislation. There have been no new organizational changes within the security forces. There has been no new strategy. The government has failed to keep Jamaicans safe. Their record on crime and crime control is abysmal. We, in the opposition People's National Party, support a different approach to the problem of violent crime. We believe it must be a balanced approach. We have to close off that pipeline of our youths flowing into prisons, the morgue, and the cemetery. We believe in a national program to save at-youth risks from turning to badness and the gun. The education system has failed so many of our youths. We must invest in them and give them a second chance to become productive citizens. This program must be well funded and include mentorship, remedial education, vocational skills training, life skills coaching, preparation for the world of work, and job placements. We started this with Unite for Change during the last PNP government. This government abandoned that program. They don't believe in social investment. We do. We also believe in the Peace Management Initiative and using community influencers as violence interrupters who are on the ground and can intervene in conflicts and prevent a spiral of reprisal killings. The government has effectively abandoned the PMI. We will build it back and make it work for the Jamaican people again. Good results can be achieved by proactive cooperation between the police and community leaders, supported by local political organizers, the churches, and other non-government organizations. That was how we achieved a situation where Augustown enjoyed a whole year without a single murder. And in my own constituency, a similar initiative started in early October has been producing similar good results. These proactive efforts need to be supported by the state so that they can be sustained. Peace must transition into income-earning projects and training opportunities so that the status quo is permanently shifted from a cycle of violence to a cycle of community upliftment. More must be done to create winner cities out of the inner cities, as the most honorable Portia Simpson Miller used to say. Proper garbage collection is essential, so is adequate street lighting, and decaying water and sewage infrastructure must be upgraded so people are not living in squalor. There must be a program to empower residents to upgrade the deplorable housing stock in many of these communities. We, Jamaica, must make these investments to create living conditions which support dignity and self-esteem in these communities. On the law enforcement side, we must proactively modernize our laws to support law enforcement by the security forces. We passed anti-gang legislation to tackle the main source of murders in this country. That legislation has been showing positive results. We passed legislation to tackle lotto scamming, and that has been an effective methodology in dealing with that problem. We passed legislation to enable DNA evidence to support convictions of criminals. The general architecture of law enforcement was significantly strengthened under the last PNP administration, and we got results. This government is negligent and inept when it comes to developing and passing effective legislation. Where is the overhaul of the Firearms Act? Where is the legislation to bring new and enhanced security measures to provide an efficient mechanism for enhanced surveillance of dangerous suspects? Where are the tracking devices for alleged sex offenders and other violent criminals who are granted bail? We've been hearing about these things for years now, but the government has dropped the ball in each instance. Where are the agreed adjustments to strengthen the anti-gang legislation arising out of the parliamentary review that we completed over a year ago? Nothing has happened since on that, even though tackling gangs by effective prosecutions is so vital to the safety of our people. These lapses and failures will not occur under the next PNP administration. We see legislative agility as a strategic imperative in tackling the crime problem in a sustainable way. Ladies and gentlemen, I have been consistent in my opposition to the use of states of emergency as a strategy to tackle Jamaica's long-standing problem of violent crime. It does not work, and it will not work. Jamaica deserves better. We do not need states of emergency and to take away the rights of our people to make Jamaica safe. The JDF can support the police on patrols and at checkpoints without states of emergency. It is just a question of how you organize your security forces. It has been going on for years. We do not need states of emergency to have police and soldiers on the ground in our communities. There can be curfews, there can be cordon and search without states of emergency. These tools exist under ordinary legislation, and it is a dangerous falsehood, fake news spread by this government to suggest that having security on the ground means you have to have states of emergency. Not go so. This use of states of emergency is also, in my opinion, illegal and unconstitutional. The Supreme Court has said so. The government is appealing that decision, but the Court of Appeal has not yet ruled on the matter. And there is another case before the Constitutional Court to be heard in December, challenging this use of states of emergency. The judicial process has been grossly disrespected by this government by going back to that strategy when the matter is before the courts. We do not support this violation of the principle of separation of powers. The Prime Minister called the rule of law and upholding a constitution as a matter of academics. That is one of the most dangerous statements ever made by an elected leader of this country. When he became Prime Minister, he swore an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of Jamaica. But he clearly has little regard for the basic rights of our people. Ladies and gentlemen, Jamaica is a democracy governed by our Constitution and the rule of law. We became that after centuries of struggle for the freedom of our people. The People's National Party will resist any attempt to make our beloved country into a police state. We have come too far to give up our basic rights. The Prime Minister knows he has failed, but he is clutching at straws and refuses to acknowledge it. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. In my State of the Nation presentation in September 24th to be exact, I pointed to the worrying trend that there were 4 police divisions generating, at the time, 32% of the murders. It was approximately 2 months ago. In the interim, those 4 police divisions have seen another 67 murders. On Sunday, I listened to the press conference when almost word for word, the government spoke to these 4 police divisions and the percentage of the national total that they contributed. So the question is, if this was brought to their attention 2 months ago, why did they wait so long to act while another 67 Jamaicans were murdered? It's because they have to perpetuate what I call the big lie. The big lie is what the opposition leader referred to earlier, in that only a state of emergency allows for police and soldiers in adequate quantities, in adequate numbers, to be deployed in communities where there is a surge in murders. So because they need to maintain the big lie which they've been telling for the last 4 to 5 years, they came to Parliament with what really was a relatively superficial amendment to the Emergency Powers Act to pretend that somehow they had addressed the fundamental concerns that were raised in the challenge of Everton Douglas et al. To their detention and to the states of emergency more generally. The government is so committed to the big lie that they have totally misallocated resources between the JDF and the JCF. The JDF has seen a 100% increase in their recurrent budget in the last few years, compared with only a 30% increase for the JCF. The capital budget for the JDF, again, and let me just give you some actual figures. In the Ministry of National Security, we have seen a recurrent budget increase from 50 billion in 2014 to just over 80 billion in 2021-22. The JDF's recurrent budget has more than doubled, moving from 12 billion to 26 billion, while the JCF's recurrent budget has increased by only a third. On the capital expenditure side, the JDF has again enjoyed the lion's share of the ministry's budget, consistently receiving an allocation of twice the JCF's capital budget over the last 4 years. The JDF's capital budget peaked at over 12 billion per year. Now bear in mind that the capital budget of the Ministry of Education is $2 billion. Therefore, the JDF alone had a capital budget of 6 times the Ministry of Education. So the government has gone all in on this strategy of militarizing our policing. They've gone all in, so much so that the chairman of the Police Federation, in interviews with media over the last few days, has pointed to the fact that the police are currently demoralized and demotivated. They have seen that they're being treated like the poor cousins of the security forces. They are having to use their own funds to buy uniform and boots. Meanwhile, exorbitant amounts of money are going to be spent in this PR exercise, in these vehicular checkpoints which reduce 3-lane roads to 1 lane, back up traffic for hours, will not recover one firearm or cause the arrest and charge of one criminal, because it is so obviously ineffective. People can see with an hour's notice where the checkpoint is way up the road and would have ample time to get out of the vehicle or to otherwise divert their route. The judgment, I believe, is of Justice Bertram Morrison in the Everton Douglas case, has a few relevant sentences that I would like to point to, because I believe it would be helpful if members of the media and the public read that judgment and get an appreciation of the issues that it raises. In one sentence or in one paragraph, he says, the free and democratic society thereby created functions best where there is trust between the average citizen and the state. corruption, high crime rates, unemployment, and underfunded social services may undermine that trust. Now, I want to point to corruption, unemployment, and underfunded social services. We need a state of emergency to address corruption that is rampant by this government. We need a state of emergency to address the social conditions in these communities that are generating a third, notwithstanding that they represent only 1% of the geographic area of Jamaica, but are generating a third of the violent crime. We need a state of emergency in terms of social investment in those communities, not continual suppression by militaristic style policing. And I don't want to, obviously, I don't want to point out any particular sector of the society that is unaffected. But the truth is, we cannot escape the fact that there are two Jamaicas. I've said before, if 24 young men, the sons of the leaders of the private sector, or the sons of those living in Upper St. Andrew, were detained without charge for 1 week in this country, we would have no more states of emergency. It would not be tolerated. But again, referring to the judgment of Justice Morrison, he said, and I quote, "The state gave more weight to the potential loss of property by implementing a scheme under the Emergency Powers Regulation for compensating persons whose property rights were affected, whilst implementing no such scheme for persons whose rights to liberty were affected." The right to liberty is the most fundamental right guaranteed in our Constitution under the Charter of Rights, and we must respect that. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It has to go down a little lower for me, but never mind that. Senator Bunting has made the case very well. Our liberty is one of the most important things to all of us. I can assure you that no Jamaican would like to spend an hour in a jail cell, not even an hour in the holding area. In 2018, when the state of emergency was first declared, over 3,000 young men were detained, and only 4% of them were charged and with minor offenses. We come now to 2021, and we have no guarantees that this will not happen again, because this government governs in panic mode. So when things seem to reach a crisis in terms of murders, what they do is reach for the only tool that they have, which is a state of emergency. The Constitution of Jamaica, which we hold so dear, and on which all the democratic foundations are built, made it very, very pellucid that a state of emergency could only be called under certain circumstances, because it acknowledged the right to liberty. We have had murders increasing for some time. We have had these barbaric acts on display. But the Prime Minister, because he wants to use this only tool that he knows that does not require a significant amount of effort on his part, he tells us that there is an emergency. Let me make it clear. We feel the pain of every mother, of every father, of every sister, of every brother who loses somebody to gun violence. When somebody dies under those kind of circumstances, the members of parliament in constituencies, regardless of what side, they have to rush to comfort them because it is felt, and it is felt by everyone in the nation. But at the same time, we cannot condone inflicting punishment on innocent citizens because we mourn victims. The duty of government is to find a fine balance so that we can have persons who are criminal apprehended, so that we can get the guns off the street, so that we can have people before the court to investigate in a manner where we are assured that persons will be convicted. That is what government must do for the people of this country. You ask citizens, what is it that you like about a state of emergency? They like the fact that there are a lot of soldiers in their community and there are a lot of police in their community, and they want some street lights fixed in their community. I say to the governing party, the Jamaica Labour Party, go out there and do what the people want, but do not apprehend the young men in this society and throw them in jail for days, for months, for years. Everton Douglas was detained for 204 days and one of his colleagues for 458 days when no charge was laid. I say finally that when we go into Parliament, this document, when we go into Parliament, each one of us swears that we will uphold the Constitution of this land. And when the Prime Minister casually and callously dismisses this Constitution by saying that any discussion about people's rights is an academic argument, people should take note. People should take note because it is a signal that he does not view this document in a way which he is required to do, and that he does not value the oath which he has taken over and over and over again as one of the longest serving members of Parliament. I want you to understand that the People's National Party is vested in the safety and security of the people of this country. But we also have a duty to the individuals to protect their right to liberty and to ensure that they are not exposed to risk simply because the way to suppress crime is to scrape them up and throw them into custody. I ask you who are listening to understand where we come from and to understand how much this means to us, that we are not opposing for opposing's sake, as the Prime Minister would want you to think. But we are about the creation of a just and equitable society. Thank you.
Thank you. Away with that.